So for this assignment, I just want to explain how to do this since some people might be doing it at home by themselves. And this assignment, you're supposed to have me demonstrate what to do and then work together as a class for the second part, and then you do it by yourself. So I will help you through the first two parts. Notice that this is targeting our essential learning goal, where we look at how language conveys purpose with clarity. So we're looking specifically for word choice, characterization, voice, and tone, which we talked about in last quarter. And then we dove into reading. So it might be a little bit unfamiliar for a second, but I think you'll catch on really quick. So this is what we're going to do. It says annotate the entire passage. The first passage will be done by the teacher. The second will be done as class. Third will be completed independently by you, the student. I have these in hard copy. So if you're home, you can print it out and do this by hand, which is what I'm going to be doing today because it's a little bit easier for me to annotate with a pen than it is in Google Docs, but you can also do it in Google Docs, no problem. I just find it easier to talk while I'm writing than I do to talk while I'm typing. So that's why I chose to do it this way. So we're going to read the piece, then we'll go and look at some word choice, look at some specific words and see if we can define them. Why are they in there? They seem to be adding something to the piece. Annotate characterization. What do we learn about the character? So how do we pick up on their personality or what's going on with them? And then voice and tone is just kind of our overall impression of what this section seems to feel like, right? So that's kind of what we're going with. So this first passage, let's see if I can scoot up enough to get the whole thing in here. Whoop. It's a little short, but okay, there we go. So I'm going to read it first, and then I will annotate. Coming into Salem now, Reverend Hale conceives of himself much as a young doctor on his first call. His painfully acquired armory of symptoms, catchwords, and diagnostic procedures are now to be put to use at last. The road from Beverly is unusually busy this morning, and he has passed 100 rumors that make him smile at the ignorance of the yeomanry in this most precise science. He feels himself allied with the best minds of Europe, kings, philosophers, scientists, and ecclesiasts of all churches. His goal is light, goodness, and its preservation, and he knows the exaltation of the blessed, whose intelligence, sharpened by minute examinations of enormous tracts, is finally called upon to face what may be a bloody fight with the fiend himself. Okay, first thing, going back in, I just want to look for some words that maybe I don't know very well or that I think are significant that help us, right? Because you might be reading and you might go, oh, I don't understand what that word is. And that's a good choice for word choice because then you can look up the definition to find out what it means and how it adds to the passage. So first thing is this word conceives. That's the first word that catches my attention. That might not be a word that I'm super familiar with, but if I look up the definition, we get this idea. I'm not looking up the definition. I'm just remembering off the top of my head. But to make something. So when it says he conceives of himself, he's like making this image of himself. Or we could say imagine, right? He imagines himself in as something. So that's a good help if I don't understand what that word conceives means. If I replace it with imagines, like, oh, that's a word I'm way more familiar with, that makes more sense. So Reverend Hill imagines himself much as a young doctor on his first call. Okay, that helps me understand what's going on. The next thing, word choice that kind of like catches my attention, I'm actually going to go with a 3-word phrase, painfully acquired armory. So painfully, I know what that word means, right? But it's an interesting description. It feels kind of ouch, right? So I'm just going to write ouch on there. Acquired is a word that means to get or purchase. So he's gotten something. In this case, he's he's trying to learn something. So he's acquired it through like learning. He's purchased it with his time and his learning, right? Okay, painfully acquired armory. An armory is where you get weapons. So it's not literal, it's a figurative description, but it's where someone can pick up like swords and bows and different things like that. So he's imagining not only himself as a doctor, but like he's um, going into battle, right? Because he has gotten this all these weapons where of symptoms, catchwords, and diagnostic procedures, right? So that kind of ties those two things together. This doctor that's in a battle with something. Um, let's see. The next like word or words that kind of stick out to me: ignorance of the yeomanry. So ignorance is a word that means um, not stupid, even though a lot of the time people kind of say that as a synonym, but just uninformed, right? So uninformed or unknowing, right? Like these people just don't know. They don't know what I know. And then yeomanry is a word that means like everyday people. So he sees himself as kind of being not part of the everyday people group. Okay. Um, so let's see if there are any others that stick out. Oh, okay. Down here, minute examinations of enormous tracts. If I were to translate that into human or everyday speech for us today, minute is, I mean, you might have looked at that and said minute, but minute is a different word. It's pronounced differently. It means careful, careful or close. Examination, like looking at something, right? Of enormous tracts, those are just books. So, but because it's enormous, right? It's big books. So, careful examinations of big books. He's done a lot of studying. So, we get that sense of like he's done a lot of reading, a lot of studying. He's right worked really hard to get this knowledge that he has. So, those are just some of the words that I noticed in the word choice. Now I want to look for characterization. What impression do I get of him as a person? What kinds of things do I feel about him? Well, in looking at this, very first one, Reverend Hill conceives of himself much as a young doctor on his first call. He's like excited, right? Like a doctor spends a lot of time studying and then he finally gets released into the world to work, and the first time that he's let go to work on his own, he's probably really excited, right? So I get this sense of excitement. He's ready to help people. He wants to help. Um, see, it makes him smile. So he seems happy. He feels himself allied with the best minds of Europe. So he's feeling pretty smart at this point. And he just feels prepared, right? He feels ready here. Feels ready, feels prepared, right? He finally his goal is light, goodness, and its preservation. He knows the exaltation of the blessed, whose intelligence, sharpened by minute examinations, is finally called upon to face what may be a bloody fight with the fiend himself. So he feels ready, he feels excited, right? We have finally and at last that kind of tell us like he is kind of ready to prove himself. So if I were to just kind of summarize it in a quick like characterization. If I were, like use a description, an adjective to describe him, I would maybe say confident, eager, and maybe a little arrogant, right? Because he kind of like looks down on people. Oh, sorry, let me move that up. Okay, so that's the second thing. We want to find some characterization, and we can point to the different things that show us that, right? Like happy, at last, feeling smart, those kinds of things. Then the last thing is to annotate voice and tone. We're really just looking for tone, like what is the feeling of this passage? Does it feel melancholy? Does it feel excited? Does it feel anxious? Those kinds of things. And this one, I would say that the overall tone is confident, right? It's happily, a lot of these are going to be very similar to our characterization. So if you have the same thing for both of them, that's totally fine. All right, so that's the end of that first paragraph. If you need to pause and get those down, I will just kind of pause right here. Still in this first section, I have another little paragraph. This is actually Reverend Hale talking, so I didn't want to do just Arthur Miller's commentary, but practice this with him talking, because most of the rest of this is just him talking. And so we can see this a little bit differently. So it says, "Hail, with rising exaltation, you are God's instrument put in our hands to discover the devil's agents among us. You are selected, Tituba. You are chosen to help us cleanse our village. So speak utterly, Tituba. Turn your back on him and face God. Face God, Tituba, and God will protect you. Who came to you with the devil? 2, 3, 4, how many?" So first we want to look for words that we might not know or that we think are important. So first thing for me is exaltation. That tells us, and rising exaltation, it tells us a little bit of how he's feeling. Exaltation is like being excited about something and maybe cheering about it a little bit. So it's a happy emotion, excited, cheering. Those would be good. Descriptions, it feels elevated above what normal people normally feel. So I could write that down too. Like he's being lifted up by something. Let's see, instrument, like tool or uh, tool, something useful, right? Let's see. Any other words? I'm not really seeing any other words that I'm really like struggling to understand or that I don't know. But it is interesting how he's describing her. So these words, like God's instrument, you are selected, so like chosen. And then he says you are chosen, so like special, picked out of everyone else, right? To help us cleanse our village. So cleanse, clean, right? You can, if we took that se off, help us clean our village. Like, oh, okay, wow. So yeah, how he's describing Tituba is he's like making her sound like she's doing something special or she is somebody special. She has a special job to do. So how does this kind of help us understand his characterization, right? What are we getting from this? Well, he's speaking with a lot of authority, right? You are. This gets repeated here, and then here, and then here 3 times. He says it 3 times, and then he makes a promise, God will protect you. So those things all kind of tell me that he's speaking with authority. Remember that he's a minister, so he feels pretty confident making these declarations about God's will and not the devil's will, right? So I'm going to just write this characterization. He's authoritative. Again, we could say confident. He feels confident saying that she is these things. Very declarative. I'm going to write that there. All right, so then the tone here, again, confident, sure. He sounds very, very sure in this. Okay. So that hopefully will help, right? We just want to kind of follow that process through the rest of these passages. So passage 2 is actually 3 paragraphs. I did 2 as an example, but they're about the same length as my 2 were combined. And then your 1 by yourself is just 1 paragraph, but it is not quite as long as these ones altogether. Okay, so and remember, we're just trying to track what is happening in the characterization of Reverend Hale here. So let's read this next paragraph. Hale, I am a stranger here, as you know, and in my ignorance, I find it hard to draw a clear opinion of them that come accused before the court. And so this afternoon, and now tonight, I go from house to house. I come from Rebecca Nurse's house, and this is a strange time, mister. No man may longer doubt the powers of the dark are gathered in monstrous attack upon this village. There is too much evidence now to deny it. So this is kind of interesting. Like right away, he is sounding different than what he sounded like up here, right? Up here, he's like making declarations, you're here to help us among our village, and then suddenly he says, I'm a stranger here. So that's interesting just because of the contrast to me. So I'm gonna circle that stranger. Why does he describe himself as a stranger? That's an interesting word choice to me. It means like outcast, somebody new, doesn't belong, right? Like those are some of the associations that we have with this word stranger. And in my ignorance, so again, not knowing something, I find it hard to draw a clear opinion of them that come accused before the court. So this is not sounding confident this time, right? He is feeling a little bit concerned and confused, and we can see that because of those 2 words that he's using. Let's see if there are any other words that might stand out to me. This is a strange time, right? Maybe unusual. Sorry about the bell. So this is an unusual time. This is not normal. Not normal. And then he brings up this word doubt. That's when you have concerns, you're not sure, right? You're unsure about stuff. So those words kind of give us a sense that maybe he's not as confident as he used to be, right? And some of the other things, right? I find it hard to draw a clear opinion of them. Not sure what to think. Right? I go from house to house. He's trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to know people. Fairly quickly. so then he can make a better judgment call. So characterization here in this paragraph is a lot more doubtful. So tone, I think we could say he sounds unsure. He went from being so confident and so sure to now he's not sure. This video is getting pretty long, and I don't want to make it too much longer than it currently is because we're at 20 minutes. So I'm going to skip these next two paragraphs, but I think you have 3 paragraphs as an example. You can definitely do it on your own. This is from Act 4. So you've read it before, but you're just going to follow the same thing. You're going to look for words you don't understand. You're going to look for characterization and then get the overall impression of the tone. And then I will just kind of give an example with what we've already done of what to do on this back part. So once you've annotated, this part should be super, super easy because you've already done the work. You just have to pull it out and put it into this. So what you want to do is find 4 word choice things, and this can be a specific word or it can be a phrase like we've kind of been underlining, and you're going to put it right in here, and then you'll put the meaning, so what you take it to mean. So again, this is really helpful if you've kind of been defining things as you go along. So if I were to do this with using the first passage that I did, you will want to do your passage, but just as an example, the first word I might write in here is conceives. And we wrote a meaning, to make or imagine. And then the author's purpose. This is the one part that we didn't really annotate, but it's really pretty simple. You just ask yourself, like, why did the author use that word? What is the role of that word, I guess, in the passage? And so here it has some suggestions of things that you might have to create tone, for imagery, to develop characterization, to create an emotional effect, show the attitude of the speaker, etc. In this sentence, if we go back, it's Reverend Hale conceives of himself as a young doctor. So he imagines himself. So this helps us develop some characterization, and it helps us see inside of Reverend Hale's head. So I'm going to write that down. You can just do it like I just pulled to develop characterization, but if none of those really work for you, you can just write in your own words, right? Show Reverend Hale's thoughts. I mean, that's how it's showing us. Developing characterization is it's showing us his thoughts. So either of those would be appropriate answers. And so you're just going to pick 4 things, and you'll put them in here and just do exactly like this. Then number 2, I'm just looking for like 1 to 2 sentences. It doesn't need to be very long. It says, give an example of characterization within your passage and identify the character trait. So if I was using that same first original passage, I might say, oh, let me look. I have right here where I wrote feeling smart. I could write this down. He feels himself allied with the best minds of Europe. And then I already know what it shows me. It's the characterization, right? So an example of characterization is he feels himself allied with the best minds of Europe. Oh, I can spell Europe. I'll just start it over. Europe. This shows, maybe not us, that Reverend Hale feels smart. Right. Pretty straightforward and simple. And then the tone of your passage. So if I were to go back and look at my tone again, confident. Oh, sorry. Let me get it on here. Confident, right? So then I want to say the tone of the passage is confidence. And then it does ask for specific evidence because then I can just give some brief points to support. It doesn't need to be a really long sentence, like you don't have a big space. So I'm just looking for 1 to 2 sentences again. The tone of the passage is confidence because Reverend Hale comes in ready to find or diagnose. And I want to use diagnose because it reminds us of that for those first 2 sentences. Diagnose witches and he feels smart enough to do so. So I'm tying in kind of this characterization into this as support for his confidence. Because when people feel smart, they feel confident, right? So just keep it pretty straightforward and simple. If you wanted to pull direct quotes, you can, but just referencing them is also fine. The last part of this assignment, this makes it look really intimidating to have it so big, but essentially what you're doing is you're answering this question: which character within the Crucible is the most to blame for the deaths in Salem during the witch trials? Support your claim with relevant text evidence and reasoning. If we look up here, your answers should be 1 to 3 sentences long. It doesn't need to be really, really long. As we look at the rubric, it says reflects clarity in thought and purpose. So you're answering the question that's being asked. Don't get off track, right? And then part 2, rubric part 2 says takes a clear position that answers the prompt and shows direction of argument. Now, this is a question that people sometimes are like, well, there are a lot of people to blame for the deaths in Salem. But notice that it says the most to blame. So if you believe that Reverend Paris, Reverend Hale, Abigail Williams, Judge Danforth, and Judge Hawthorne are to blame for the deaths in Salem, you need to pick which person of that group you think is the most responsible and then tell me why. So I don't want it to be a list of people that you think are to blame. I want it to be this person is most responsible for what happened in Salem because this text evidence. So, and then that's the last part of the rubric is that your evidence and your point are tied together. So hopefully that helps you. If you have questions, please send me an email or shoot me a message in Canvas and I will be happy to help.